Welcome back to the tutorials. So in the last tutorial we looked at how we dealt with collisions with monsters or enemies, and when we collided with the enemy in the last video we moved back to the start position in the level. There are other options available, but that's the one that we're going with this tutorial series. So in this series I'm going to be looking at, this next video I'm going to be looking at how we deal with, or how we can deal with monsters by obviously shooting them. So we're going to look at the firing of bullets. In the next video we will look at what happens when the bullet collides with various different objects and how to deal with those. But just for the purpose of this video we're going to break this down into a number of steps, and it's going to be solely looking at firing a bullet from the player object. So it's not going to deal with collisions, just firing the bullet. So the first thing that I wanted to go through with you is creating the sprite for the bullet, because we're going to be resizing the canvas. So I'm just going to right click on my sprites, assets, title, and I'm going to create a sprite. There we go. Now when we create a sprite, it defaults to a size of 64 pixels by 64 pixels. That's going to be way too big because the bullet would be the same size as the player. We don't want that. So I'm going to resize the canvas first. So I'm going to click the resize, and here I'm going to resize the canvas. I'm not going to scale the image, I'm going to resize the canvas. And I'm going to use something like 8 by 8. Let's try that. 8 by 8, and I'm going to apply it. If I click this button here, it's center fits, and I'm going to change the origin up the top here. Okay, we don't want it there, we want it in middle center. So I'm just going to click middle center. Oh, that's the wrong way, sorry. Middle center there, and you can see it moves the origin to the center of the sprite. So what I'm going to do now is to edit the image, and I'm just going to fill it with a white fill. If you wanted to use a different color bullet, that's absolutely fine. And I'm just going to click the fill button there, close that down, and my sprite is created. Okay. I'm now going to create an object for my bullet which wears that sprite. The one thing I haven't done here is rename the sprite, so I'm just going to go spr underscore bullet. Okay, and then I'm going to press enter, and now it's named, and I can close that down. I'm now going to create a new object that's going to wear that that sprite. So I'm going to create an object. I'm going to call it obj underscore bullet. Press enter, and I'm going to allocate the sprite to my object. So there's my bullet sprite. So I'm going to leave this open because I'm going to be using this this object in a second. Now in game, I'm going to be firing a bullet when a key is pressed. So I'm going to use the space bar for my key press. So in my player object I need an event for what happens when I press a space bar. So I'm going to open up my player object. Okay, now I've got two different objects on the screen here now. So let's have a look at these events. So I'm going to add an event. You can see that I've got two different ones here: key down, key pressed, and key up. Key down is what we used when we did the movement. So as long as I keep the key down, it will keep performing the action that's in the event. Now I don't want that, because if I do that, if I keep the space bar pressed down, it's going to produce loads and loads of bullets, and I don't want that. I want it to produce one bullet when I press the space bar. Okay, key up checks for when you release the key, and key pressed checks when you've pressed the key and released it. So we're going to use key pressed. Okay, and I'm going to use the space bar for my bullet. Okay, so this is what's going to produce my bullet. So firing a bullet. Okay, so don't forget, always try and use comments where you can to help to identify what your code is doing. It's going to really help you when you come to debug, or when you come to explain what you've done in your program. So we're going to use a pre-built function, an inbuilt function, to do this, and what it's going to do, it's going to create an instance on the current layer. So if I open up my rooms, just to explain what I mean by that. Okay, and open up room 1. Okay, you can see that we have layers, and we have we're currently on the instances layer. This is what this layer is called, instances. Okay, so when I create any instance in my game, it will appear on this instances layer, unless I tell it otherwise. So everything that appears in game is an instance. So every single one of these tiles is an instance. My monster is an instance. My player object is an instance, and each bullet I fire will be an instance. That's why it's called instance create layer. So let me just close my room down so I get rid of that on the side. So if I start typing this in, and I'll explain it as I go. Instance underscore, oh, so I'm clicking the thing, instance underscore create underscore layer. Okay, layer, and I open a bracket, and now at the bottom of the screen it's showing me, or it's asking me to type in a couple of parameters. So I'm looking down at the bottom here. Okay, so instance create layer, so create an instance, so that's the instance create on a layer that I specify. That's what that means. So it's going to ask me firstly, where do I want to create the instance? Well, I want to create the instance at the current X and Y position of my player. Okay, so and that's going to be at the point of origin, so it's going to produce it in the center. So I'm going to just type in X because I wanted to produce the bullet in on the X point of my player object, comma, Y because I wanted to produce the instance in the same Y position, so it's going to produce it in the same place, comma, the layer ID. Okay, that is important that you put that in speech marks. And remember I said that the layer name was instances. If I open up the room just to show you again, the layer name is instances. This is the layer name. So that's what I'm going to type into my line of code here. Instances, comma, and what object do I want to create? Well, I want to create the bullet object. So I need to type in the object name. So there's the object name there. So it's obj underscore bullet. Okay, I'm going to close the bracket, and don't forget it's important that you close the statement off with a semicolon. So I'm going to go instances create, so I'm going to create an instance on the layer in the position X and Y. So don't forget the current position of X and Y, if I did it now, would be here. Okay, so that's where I want my X and Y. On the layer called instances, which matches the name that's on here. So if I'd rename that layer to game, okay, then in those speech marks I would have typed in game, but I'm not going to rename my my instances layer, comma, and then the name of the object that we want to create, obj underscore bullet. So if I typed in obj underscore monster, when I press the space bar, it would create a monster in that place rather than the bullet. Okay, so let's compile the game and see what happens here. So I'll just wait for the game to compile. Okay, so I'm in game. So when I press the space bar, it produces a bullet. Okay, however, the bullet is not doing anything because we haven't set the bullet speed. So we've created the instance of the bullet in the layer, but we haven't given it any speed. So let's rectify that straight away. So when we create the bullet, we want it to have a speed. So this is where we need to come back down into your bullet object, and we're going to add an event, and we're going to add a create event. So I'm going to add a comment to the start of my code to show or to identify what this piece of code is going to do. So this is bullet speed. Oh no, I'll call it creating the bullet. Bullet speed. Okay, so I'm just going to type in speed because that's an inbuilt variable, equals, I don't know, let's make a number up, try 5. Let's see how we go with 5 with a semicolon on the end of the line of code. So let's run that and see what happens now. So let's compile that. Okay, so now my character's moving, and now you can see that my bullet is firing. But I've got a problem, and that is, regardless of where I go, the bullet is only traveling to the right, and that's not good for us. You can so if I wanted to try and shoot that monster, okay, that's not going to work. So we need to do something to combat that. So we need to give the bullet also a direction. So in the same ways we used 0, 90, 180 and 270 degrees to make the monster move, we also need some way of telling the bullet which way to go. And what we want to do is to fire the bullet wherever the character was moving last. So if, for example, the character is moving to the right and I click the spacebar, I wanted to fire to the right. If the character was moving left and I click the spacebar, I wanted to shoot left. Okay, so we're going to use something called a variable to enable us to record where the direction in which our character is facing. So a variable is, you could think of a variable as like an envelope that holds a value, and it's recorded in a name. Okay, so when you do algebra, for example, in mathematics, and you have a equals 3, well, the variable name is a. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to record where the character is facing last. In order to do this, we're going to be doing some more work on the player object. And what we're going to do, we're going to use a create event again, because before we can use a variable, we have to declare it. We have to say what, give it an initial value. And there are 3 types of variables we can use in GameMaker, all of which we'll use through the tutorials. The first is a local variable, which is something that's only used in a piece of code that you write. There's something called an instance variable, which is what we're going to be using now, which deals with an instance, which is the object player. And instance variables can be used outside of the player object, for example. So I could use that variable, that value, somewhere else in the program. And the third type of variable that you can use is something called a global variable. And global variables we are going to be using in this program, and they're used to be able for you to use values in any part of the program, a lot. So that would be something like score and lives, for example, would be global variables, and we're going to use global variables a little bit later on in one of the future tutorials. But for this particular piece of code, we're going to be using an instance variable. So what we want to do is to add an event, and we're going to create a create event. So when we have a create event, like I say, this is what happens when the object is created. So I'm just going to say when the player object is created. Okay, so that's just a comment, of course. What I want to do is to set the value of a variable. So I'm going to use a variable name can be any name you want. I could call it Tony if I wanted to. Okay, it doesn't really matter. It's obviously you need to try and wherever possible make the variable names as sensible as possible. So I want to this is going to be recorded in the direction in which I can shoot. So I'm going to call this variable shoot dir. Okay, shoot direction. And I'm going to set the initial value of that to 0. Okay, finishing with a semicolon. So that's setting the shoot direction of my bullet to 0. Okay. So I can use that now in my program. So let's go on to what happens when I press the left key. So at the moment, as I'm pressing the left key, I'm moving backwards or to the left of 180 degrees by 5 spaces. So what I want to do when I press the left key, I also want to change the value of shoot dir equals, and I'm going to change that to 180. So I'm going to be shooting that way. Oh, this way. Okay, that's 180. That's 0. So 180 is this. So if I'm moving my character this way, okay, this way, then I want to shoot the bullet at 180 degrees, which is to the left. Okay, so let's go back to my workspace, and I'm going to finish with a semicolon, and I'm then going to go on to my keyed in right, and if I'm moving right, I want to shoot dir equals 0. So I want to set the shoot direction to 0. Okay, let me just go back to that left. Right. There's an exclamation mark there, and that means that what I've typed in there doesn't match a variable. So if I go back to my create event, and this is interesting because this is something you're going to have to look for, shoot dir, you can see I spelled it SHOOTDIR. When I've done my left, I've missed out the T, so it's telling me with this exclamation mark that I've made a mistake. So if I type in the T there, okay, that exclamation mark now disappears. So it's important you keep your eye almost going on with the coding windows, because that would have caused an error. So the last thing I need to do to get this bullet to fire properly is to go into the create object of my bullet. I'm just going to do this before my speed command. You doesn't have to. You can do it after your speed command if you want. I am going to type in my code now to give my bullet its direction. So I want to set the direction, because don't forget direction is an inbuilt variable, is going to be equal to obj. So the direction is going to be equal to the way in which my player object is facing. So don't forget that because the variable is being created in my player object, I need to type in the name of the object the variable is in. So it's easy just to show you. So obj underscore player dot shoot dir. Okay, so what that's saying is put the direction, I'll set the direction of the bullet to shoot dir in the object player instance. Okay, so because don't forget that variable is in the obj player instance. So what we're doing is referencing this variable in this object. Okay, so as I said, referencing this variable shoot dir, which appears here, okay, in the player object, obj player. Okay, that's where you're setting the direction to the variable shoot directory shoot dir, which appears in the obj player object. Okay, so let's play it and see what happens now. So I'm moving to the left. Okay, it's shooting to the left. I've moved to the right, and it's shooting to the right. Okay, so I've now got a working game, or a working bullet firing system, where it's firing bullets in the right direction. Okay, you could increase the speed of the bullet if you wanted to. We have got some problems in the fact that the bullet goes through the wall, and it also goes straight through the ghost. So we're going to be dealing with the bullets and collisions in the next video. If you did want to increase the speed of the bullet, it's quite straightforward. All we need to do is to go back into this obj bullet and the create event for the bullet, and if I set that to 10, for example, and then rerun the game, because that might be one of the criticisms of your game when you're testing it. Okay, so if I shoot now, you can see that the bullet is firing much quicker than it was in the previous one. As a matter of fact, I think it's better, so I'll probably leave this at 10. Okay, so in the next video, or in the next tutorial, we're going to be looking at dealing with what happens when the bullet collides with objects. So what happens when it collides with the walls, and what happens when it collides with the monsters or ghosts. Okay, so I'll see you in the next tutorial.